The first reaction of spiders when faced with danger is to flee. So a spider will never deliberately attack a human. And that's because there are very, very few species whose venom is strong enough to cause really severe reactions in humans. No spider is deadly to us. Tarantulas mean big spiders, but they're not all big because the smallest adult tarantula is only 1 millimeter.
Hello and welcome to this new episode. Today we're going to talk about the world of spiders and debunk some common misconceptions we have with Christine Rollard. Hello Christine, hello, we're very happy to have you on the show today. So for those who don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
I'm Christine Rollard. I worked as a teacher researcher for 37 years at the National Museum of Natural History as a lecturer, and my specialization is as a biologist. It is or was spiders. Okay, so I am an arachnologist.
Okay, so it's the study of spiders. Does it extend to ants?
No, so actually one of the first corrections to make is that spiders are not insects. And when we talk about ants, we're talking about insects. All right, spiders are part of a large group called arachnids. So in a way, you could say I'm an arachnologist too, since I work on a group of arachnids. And among arachnids, for example, we have scorpions, we have mites like ticks, we have harvestmen or opiliones, and we have spiders. All right, so it's really its own separate group. And actually, it has nothing to do with insects, which have antennae. Spiders don't have antennae, for example. Insects have antennae, and also insects have 6 legs, while arachnids have 8 legs. So there are also morphological differences between insects and spiders, even though they're often confused. Exactly. So what I studied in spiders is, first of all, their ecology. When I did my thesis, it was a thesis in 1987. So it's a little while ago at the University of Rennes, and it was about the impact of insects that eat spiders, whose larvae feed on eggs spiders or the spiders themselves. And so there was an impact on these spider populations. When it comes to insects, we often picture spiders eating insects, but they also have parasites and predators among insects. So I did that. And when I got my position at the museum in December '88, I was asked to focus more on systematics. Identification, taxonomy, meaning identifying and classifying the spiders that I could go out and collect in the field during expeditions, whether far away or in France. There is still much to learn about spiders in France.
Okay, so earlier we clarified the difference between an ant and a spider. So there are insects on one side and spiders on the other. Besides morphological differences, are there any other fundamental differences between the two? Yes?
That's mainly it, but both of them are still part of a large group called arthropods, so animals with jointed legs, okay? An arthros and pod. And within these arthropods, we have 2 main groups. Those that have mandibles and antennae, which include insects, millipedes, and crustaceans. So all of these are grouped into the antennates or mandibulates. And on the other side, we have the chelicerates, those that have chelicerae, and arachnids are part of that group. And among the other differences, indeed, apart from the number of legs, arachnids have 2 body parts, while insects have 3 body parts. Antennae on one side, no antennae on the other. And in terms of habits, there can actually be differences in their biology and so on. Their way of life can be very different. Also, even though we sometimes find insects, millipedes, and spiders in the same environments.
So we often associate spiders with webs. Do all spiders make webs, or is it specific to certain species?
That's a good question that is often asked, because when I ask, what is the characteristic of spiders? People often tell me webs, yes, and I say no. Because actually, not all spiders make webs. That's one of the common misconceptions. Yes, about 50% of spiders don't make webs and hunt in another way. So they have hunting techniques without traps, since the web is often a trap to catch prey. And sometimes it's also both a home or a retreat area. It can also be associated with webs, but there are many that don't make any. So that's not the characteristic of spiders, but rather the characteristic is what the webs are made of. Out of silk thread,
All right.
And so the silk threads, you can actually find them here, for example. These are spider silk threads that have been wrapped around these little spools, and that's spider silk. There can be several types of silk threads in spiders for different uses. It can indeed be used to make webs, but also to move around, to wrap eggs with silk threads, and to wrap up prey. Spiders actually produce several types of silk threads. All right, but that's the characteristic of spiders, to produce silk threads, but not necessarily to make webs or traps with them.
So, okay, it's still a common characteristic, even if the use differs from one species to another.
Actually, it's not from one species to another, because in a spider's body there can be up to 6 different types of glands, and the minimum for most spiders is 3 types of glands. First of all, and if we have spiders that make traps, especially the classic trap that everyone knows, which is the beautiful regular geometric web, that's the image we usually picture with morning dewdrops. It's very pretty. Here, we already have 3 types of glands that are involved, because the frame and the radii are made of a special kind of silk thread. The spiral of the geometric web involves other glands, which add little regular drops of glue. And the attachment points for all of this come from yet another gland. And spiders that don't make geometric webs don't necessarily have the glands that create the spiral with sticky threads. They don't need them then. There are 3 to 6 types of glands, depending on the spider family. Spiders are really silk factories, the silk material in the singular.
All right, so there are really a lot of use cases depending on, yes.
Yes, absolutely, okay.
And how does the spider manage to make this web? Because sometimes we see structures that are gigantic, and especially compared to their size, which are complex, but at the same time have a regularity in their construction. So it's quite a technical work to do. Yes?
Yes, but all of that is genetically encoded. Okay, so it's true that spiders, the earliest possible traces we've found in terms of age, date back to about 300 million years ago, so way before the dinosaurs as well. And they gradually developed hunting techniques that became more and more diverse. And also with morphologies and so on that are very different depending on the environments where they can settle. So all of that is really, really important. And indeed, we realized that in the earliest possible traces, we found evidence of spinnerets. That is, the tubes at the back or in the middle of the abdomen, the rear part of the body, which produce these threads. So obviously, spiders have been using silk, this material, for a long time to move around, but for what purpose? We have spiders everywhere, in all environments, except at the 2 poles, but otherwise we have them everywhere. Because they spread out thanks to their threads, they disperse through the air by letting themselves be carried away like aeronauts with the threads. And so, as we were saying, these threads are used for many things. And it's produced by glands inside the body. They're glands with different shapes that have been named by colleagues who work on these aspects. In fact, silk, sericiginous glands, and there are glands shaped like bulbs, so they're called ampullate. Tube-shaped ones are tubuliform, and so on. And each of them produces different types of silk for different uses. So inside a gland, to be more precise about what silk material is inside the glands, it's like a solid liquid. In physics, we call it a non-Newtonian liquid. It's a bit like cornstarch with water. So when you hit it hard, you don't go through. It's solid. If you let your hand go down, it's solid.
Go down.
So that's it. It's a substance inside the glands that's like this. And then it will go through all the pipes all the way to the little tube. At the end of the ducts, it will be under pressure and it will solidify. And that's the tiny 0.007 micron thread that we see coming out. Well, that we can barely see because it's really, really thin as it comes through the ducts. There you go. There you go.
All right. So that means there's no storage of filaments. The spider builds its filament as it goes.
You have a storage of products in the gland, like a kind of mush, and then it will solidify. And it produces it throughout its life as long as it eats regularly, since everything it ingests is food. Knowing that spiders feed only on liquid, they first liquefy the tissues of their prey. And then they have a mouth, a digestive tract, a little suction crop. So when they suck, it goes like this. All of that. It will then be synthesized in the body and allow the production of what is needed for the basic proteins of silk, which is called fibroin. And also to produce synthetic elements for the venom, since spiders are venomous animals.
We talked about 6 types of fibers, so rather sticky fibers. So
yes, you have threads that are rather sticky. There's one of the glands that produces little droplets of glue that can be placed on the specific threads of the spider's web.
all right, so there are also structural fibers to create structures. What are the other types of glands for?
The glands that are common to all spiders. These are the glands that allow them to produce the threads for moving around. Threads for moving around, which are also called drag lines, survival threads, or lifelines, because that's what allows a spider, if it suddenly falls from a surface, to always have threads behind it. Yes, so that's the most common thread for all spiders. Okay, then you have spiders that will wrap up their prey before going to bite them and inject venom. They will first spin them around and release lots of silk threads to trap them. Not all of them do that, and not all of them have those glands either, but that's also what it's used for. And then there are others as well, which allow the females to wrap and keep the eggs together, and to make little egg sacs or cocoons, sometimes with special silk padding to keep the eggs warm. So we also have threads that are used only to make the silk for the cocoons.
Are there any uses of silk that are a bit unusual? So with spiders, a bit more unusual.
That's already quite a lot of uses. Yes, so there's already a good amount of diversity. So compared to what I've already mentioned, there isn't necessarily much more. Then when they use threads to make traps, the traps can have different shapes. So we have web shapes, for example, that are very regular. That's the image we might have of it. We have webs that are more like sheets, sometimes extended by a funnel. So those are particular families. We have sheet webs where the spider stays underneath, but here there's no retreat. We have tube webs, we have tangle webs. Some only make a small part of a geometric web in a triangle, and others use silk threads with little drops of glue just to make a lasso. So these are species that can be found in Australia, and there are others that will produce threads. By making a small geometric web, but they don't sit on it, they hold the geometric web with their front legs while hanging from the vegetation by their back legs. And when prey passes by, it feels the vibrations, because spiders are very, very sensory animals. It will release its net just like gladiators did, hence their name, gladiator or net casting spiders, as they throw the net onto their prey. So there are also different uses or constructions depending on the species.
We mentioned earlier that spiders are not the top predators in the insect world, that they themselves have other predators.
Careful, not the insect world, yes.
The confusion between the two, but what is it? What are the predators of spiders?
The biggest predator of spiders is spiders themselves.
Themselves.
In fact, they self-regulate, which is actually quite convenient in the animal world. There are many other groups of animals that self-regulate like this, but spiders can eat each other. They are animals that, for the vast majority of the nearly 54,000, are like this. The species described so far in the world by researchers who actually work in taxonomy and systematics. We have about 20 species that are considered social or that live in communities. The others are solitary, and as solitary predatory animals, they can feed on other spiders. That's part of how they function. Then they eat a lot of insects, and there are insects that can also parasitize them, either on the outside of their bodies or even inside, or they parasitize or they feed on them, on spiders. Another major predator of spiders is birds, since spiders can fly through the air and become part of the aerial plankton. So birds really enjoy that. So yes, when they fly away, or rather when they let themselves be carried at the end of their thread, like aeronauts, there birds can eat a lot of them, and bats can eat them too. They can go elsewhere too. Birds can also look for spiders on webs to feed their young. And then on the ground, there are mostly amphibians. Small micromammals can eat spiders, and spiders can also eat, conversely, this kind of animal when they are large spiders. So everything is interconnected. So we're talking about food chains and food webs rather than just food chains, which can be very complex.
So speaking of food chains, do spiders have a so-called role in the ecosystem? How do they use them? So in this ecosystem,
They really are at this level of predators, so predators that regulate populations. They can be present for certain groups of species in wet environments, others in forest environments, and others in more open environments, in meadows or things like that. So we know a few groups of species, and in these environments, that is, these habitats, we still have to think on their scale. They are still microhabitats. The majority of spiders are still, let's say, small.
yes,
That's right, actually. The majority of,
barely visible spiders.
if you're not paying attention, see around 5 mm body size for the vast majority of all spiders in the world. Okay, so at the microhabitat scale, they regulate insect populations, sometimes pests, crops, and so on, if we get a little closer to the human side. But they've had their balancing role for a very, very, very long time, actually, in nature and in ecosystems.
So is there an impact with pesticides? Does it tend to reduce their populations?
It's true that we haven't necessarily done very in-depth studies on population monitoring, etc. But yes, of course, there is an impact as predators. First of all, they can be impacted directly or indirectly in relation to their prey if they feed on prey that have themselves been infested with pesticides and other things. Of course, when they ingest that, it's not necessarily going to be good. Moreover, spiders tend to, well, they can fast for quite a long time, so they can go without eating for days, weeks, even months sometimes, but they need to drink regularly. And they can drink from small droplets left on vegetation or on webs and so on. If these droplets are completely soaked with insecticides, then of course that's not going to be good either. And we realized that these animals who were and who are often disliked, to be honest, weren't always taken into account in environmental studies. Now, they are a bit more since there is a red list of threatened species in mainland France, so in the Hexagon, which came out 3 years ago. It was a huge task, about 10 people working for 5 years, with hours and hours of meetings, because there was a lot of biological data we didn't have, Arachnids. But nevertheless, even if for 30% we have no information about their life cycle, their environment, etc., out of roughly 1,700 species present in mainland France, in 49 different families, 10% of the species are now threatened, with mostly human-related problems such as drying out of habitats, deforestation, and the use of pesticides. So there are obviously many impacts due to human practices.
And so if spiders have a role in regulating insects, basically a role as insect predators, the fewer insects there are, and so by extension, the more we have to use pesticides to make up for it. Can we look at it that way?
Well, first of all, we noticed that insect populations had decreased before we noticed it for spiders. Maybe that's because it wasn't studied. However, we know insect populations have still declined, even among some long-protected species. We have also, of course, regularly mentioned the declines in bird populations, for example, as well. So as we were saying that everything is connected, obviously there is an impact behind it. Regarding that, it's a bit difficult if you want to answer directly, but of course, everything happens, everything has an impact, everything is connected in relation to that.
We often see spiders in homes and houses. Is there a reason why they tend to want to seek shelter in our homes?
That's a complete misconception.
Ah, okay.
That means they don't necessarily come into houses, but at a certain point they settle in our homes. Let's put ourselves on their level. They're small, and a certain number of species genetically will look for sheltered places, so in their microhabitats, sheltered spots. There are more and more of us. We've destroyed a number of things and built houses, which are sheltered places. So when the spider is looking for a place, for those that need to find a sheltered spot, they can go into houses. It's still that little spot behind a piece of furniture and so on, where it's going to settle. And from time to time, they say that spiders come into our homes at a certain time of year, often in the fall. We see some that are a bit bigger, often they were already there, but in their way of life, they're spiders. We often talk about house spiders, the Tegenaria. So in terms of size, it's about 1.5 to 1.8 centimeters in body length, with fairly long legs. That gives them quite a large span. They're dark, nocturnal, and sometimes fast, so nothing about them appeals to people. And at this time in the autumn, we see the males wandering around inside houses. They don't necessarily come inside because it's cold, especially since right now it's not really that cold, even during the winters. They are already settled, just like the females, in corners with their sheet webs, waiting for prey to come into their trap. But during the breeding season, the males have to go look for the females. So they wander a bit more in our homes, so we see them a bit more during that time. That suggests they're coming in because it's cold. False.
All right.
And why? We actually have spiders at home because these are species that we can find at home, while we can also find them outside in sheltered places, in tree hollows, under fallen logs, and so on. In crevices, in low walls, so we can also find them in sheltered spaces outside at their scale. But roughly speaking, there are about 20 species that can be dependent on homes like that. That's completely true, normal and logical. Just like many mites are in our homes, like many other microorganisms we don't see.
We're often afraid of spiders because there's a whole imagination around them. We imagine they're going to bite us or sting us. Sometimes I've even heard people say they lay eggs. It makes...
Part of the misconceptions.
Look, is it a spider? Is it dangerous for us? And are these different ideas true or false?
So laying eggs under the skin, that's already a no, right? If we look at a spider, let's maybe take the little plush toy. So this is Lucas, the spider. On social media, she's cute with big eyes, so people like her. She's not well made since the 4 pairs of legs attached to the back instead of the front where they should be. Okay, all right. When you look at the morphology of a spider, there are 2 parts of the body. Well, the legs aren't in the right place. They're normally in the front. But anyway, it has pedipalps, there are chelicerae, so fangs that will inject the venom. Here, Lucas lacks the small parts at the back that are the spinnerets making silk threads. But do we see in a spider something like an ovipositor, like something that some insects have, to lay eggs under a surface or under bark or inside a host? Maybe, but nothing like that, right? Well, I think in The Lord of the Rings there was an arachnid with some kind of stinger, but real spiders don't have stingers. All right, so they have absolutely nothing to lay eggs under something. And when the female lays eggs, they'll come out through a genital slit under the abdomen. It's a venomous animal, okay? The definition of a venomous animal is an animal that has venom, which it usually stores in specialized glands. That's the case for the vast majority of venomous animals. They use them to feed, to liquefy, or even paralyze or kill their prey. For some, it's also to defend themselves from time to time. Spiders, unlike snakes, don't tend to use venom when they make defensive bites. So, okay, they're venomous, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're dangerous to humans. Those are different things. We have many venomous animals around us, even in the ocean depths. Humans aren't necessarily the intended prey. If there's physical contact with a spider, which rarely happens, we need to reduce that too. People often say they've been bitten or even stung by a spider, even though there are 2 fangs. So it's really bites, well, a bite, a double sting if you want, but that's not correct. It's other things that could have caused skin reactions, but not necessarily spiders. Why do we blame spiders? Because we don't know them well and they really have a bad reputation, and just physical contact with a spider, well, with spiders, that's the case for most people. Of course, there are bigger ones that can sometimes bite human skin and manage to pierce the thickness of our skin. But in general, if there's a defensive bite, there's not even any venom injected, so physical contact with a spider, it's something that almost never happens in our lives. Unless we provoke it, either intentionally or unintentionally, and even then only if we get bitten as a defensive reaction. There's not necessarily any injection of venom, so let's consider the case where venom is actually injected. Very, very few species have venom that's strong enough to cause really severe reactions in humans. And contrary to everything I can read or see, no spider is deadly to humans. Okay, none, I mean absolutely none. Not even tarantulas, not even the biggest specimens, tarantulas and so on. Size doesn't make it dangerous. And black widows, which are often mentioned, they have very potent venom in their world. Among spiders, they're still small spiders with very tiny fangs. You'd have to touch a black widow directly to get bitten. They're discreet spiders that weave tangled webs at vegetation bases. You have to actually touch them to notice. And if you move its web a little, usually, if it's really something that isn't felt as the vibrations of potential prey, we come along with our big clumsy feet and it runs away. The first reaction of timid spiders is to flee from danger, just like humans. We, as human animals, when faced with danger, we run away. So these black widows won't bite, but they have a very powerful venom in their world of wings, enough to kill small mammals, little snakes, things like that. So in cases where humans have been bitten by black widows and they've injected venom, yes, there are reactions that are more pronounced because it's still a powerful venom, with tachycardia, sweating, and a bit of muscle contraction. There is still a medical symptomatology associated with black widow bites, which we used to call latrodectus, and it's called latrodectism. Medically speaking, yes, those are the most severe cases, but if you're in good health, after 2 days and with proper care, there's no problem. The number of deaths each year worldwide due to confirmed bites. The spider, we saw the spider, we described it, etc. 5 to 10. Okay, so we completely reduce the danger. And it's often not due to the venom itself, but to infections or even secondary infections at the site where the bite may have occurred. And especially for spiders that we regularly hear about in the media, and sometimes it creates a buzz, the violin spiders. They cause a kind of skin necrosis, and it looks like burns that can get infected or even become super infected if not treated properly.
All right, so spiders are not dangerous?
There you go, that's fine for humans.
For humans.
Let's specify for humans. They are dangerous for their prey, so they're predators. So, and I'd like to come back to something mentioned, the tarantulas. Yes, the tarantulas, which are said to be dangerous for humans. That's not true. And I believe people's image of tarantulas is completely wrong. It's not that I think so. I'm sure that the image people have is completely wrong. For the general public, since what we see as tarantulas in the media, in movies, on television shows, and so on, they're big ones. Okay, so for us, tarantulas mean big spiders and often tropical ones. Yes, I just said 2 things that are wrong. In the definition of tarantulas, they're not all big, because the smallest tarantula, which is tropical, as an adult body size, is just 1 millimeter. It's strange we don't talk about that one because it's not impressive at all. The majority of tarantulas, even in the tropics, have a body size of 1 to 2 centimeters. And yes, there are some very big ones, and those are the ones they use in movies and television shows. And the reason they use them is because they're not dangerous. The directors aren't stupid after all. So they use something big that we don't know much about, and they keep fueling that fear and that aspect. Tarantulas are dangerous, so of course you can find big ones. Here I brought an exuvia, so it's not an actual one, it's the spider's skin. Well, it's one of the big ones indeed. Well, now it's something empty, since spiders shed their skin and molt to grow. And this is shown on television shows, etc. It's completely harmless, okay? And are they all tropical? Because I said I had 2 things wrong. The big ones, no. They range from 1 millimeter up to 13 centimeter in body size. Okay, impressive, huh? The really big ones. And are they all tropical? No. Since we have about 40 species in Europe and about 20 species in mainland France, and these species in mainland France are all terrestrial. They make burrows in the ground. You never see them if you don't know where to look, and their body size ranges from 1 cm to 3 cm. So here I brought a little tarantula that can even be found in the Jardin des Plantes in Paris, and it can be found as far as Denmark, okay, which we call sock tarantulas. And it makes silk tubes in the ground. It's silk, you can see there's silk tubes, and I dug it up. So there's an above ground part and an underground part, and the spider lives inside. It's both its home and its trap, the above ground part. It goes inside when it's hunting and waits for prey to pass over it. That creates vibrations, and it hooks through the silk tube to inject venom, and then it opens its sock, grabs its prey, and eats at the bottom of its burrow. And it will also close the little hole it made with new silk threads to prevent other creatures from getting inside. So those are our sock tarantulas, and in the south of France. So here is one of our biggest tarantulas. This one is endemic to Corsica, and these are called mason tarantulas. So it's really mostly for all Mediterranean areas, since they dig burrows like the sock tarantula. In the ground, they line the walls with silk threads. What makes a tube is that these are tube webs, but they don't leave part of the silk tube outside. They close it with a silk lid, a silk hinge, and she will cover that with soil. Here are our mason tarantulas. So we do have tarantulas in France and Europe that do this kind of thing, and the largest European tarantula is in Andalusia. She's about 4 cm in body size with the legs. That's still about this big. She's a bit dark, so it can be quite spectacular, and she lives with webs, kind of sheets of silk threads at the base of trees. She is actually protected by conventions that regulate habitats a little bit, like the Habitat Protection Directive and the Berne Convention, because in Spain it was usually the Andirons where she was found, and they destroyed a lot of Andirons to make olive groves and to import and export olive trees. So a bit everywhere we find this Andalusian tarantula in certain places in France. It has already been reported in garden centers, at private homes, transported with the olive trees.
Okay. So is there a difference between spiders and tarantulas? Are they two different species?
So we're going to talk about two groups. Spiders are an order, and within this order of Arachnids, we have two main suborders, if you will, Mygalomorphs and Araniomorphs. So we're still talking about spiders. So they have the same morphology, 2 parts in the body, 8 legs, a pair of pedipalps, the chelicerae at the front, and so on. So same characteristics, except that to differentiate them, it's not the size. Since tarantulas range from about 1 millimeter up to 13 centimeters in body size, and for non-tarantula araniomorphs, it's from 0.4 mm up to 6 centimeters in body size. Here, we're not dealing with a tarantula, and it's still quite big. C. massif, there you go, it's still one of the large non-tarantulas. Okay. It's the position of the chelicerae, the stems that hold the fangs in relation to the body's axis, okay? The stems of tarantulas are in line with the body, and the fangs are jointed at the end like this. So a tarantula will make this kind of double puncture bite. And for them, well, there are still 3,600 species of tarantulas, and for all the others, about 54,000 species. We have stems that are perpendicular to the body and crossed fangs. And so that's the movement that other spiders make. So if you look at a spider, and here, when you look at this one, or when you look at other spiders, if you don't see any stems sticking out, it's not a tarantula. If we look at the exuviae again, you can see here 2 stems that are in line with the body.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and the fangs underneath are not crossed, they're more or less parallel.
Okay.
That's the morphological difference between a tarantula and a non-tarantula. It's not about size, silkiness, or being hairy, since those aren't the same hairs spiders have on their bodies. It's not silk. Silk is the material they produce for different purposes. And the kinds of hairs you see on the bodies of spiders, those are called setae. In the plural, it's not the same material, okay? So it has the same word, one always in the singular, the material produced by the spinnerets. and one always in the plural, because there are thousands of setae on their bodies, and these setae are often sensory. To detect vibrations for the environment, to sense vibrations, to also pick up waves, temperature, humidity. In fact, we're really talking about an animal here. I often say this to people when meeting those with phobias. Now try to imagine spiders with the forces. It's a solitary animal, very sensory. We can't even imagine how sensory spiders are. They're much more sensory than we are. Sensitive, because in fact they have the senses of taste, touch, smell, and hearing thanks to sensory hairs that are mechanoreceptors and chemoreceptors, both sensory and sensitive. It's a bit similar, but well, there's touch and so on. And solitary. The vast majority of them.
All right.
There's nothing negative, actually, that's it.
So in terms of meaning, sometimes we see that they have eyes that are a bit bulging in shape. Are they still good?
One like Luca, by the way.
Does that mean it has good eyesight, a spider?
Yes, yes, yes. It's true that this is also one of the things I regularly see on social media or in the news, people saying that spiders have poor eyesight or are even blind. Well, it annoys me a little. I don't know where that comes from anyway. But once again, it's often a comparison. With us humans, we're always being anthropocentric. We don't necessarily have very good eyesight either, us, because compared to other animals, we can't see at night, for example, so we don't have night vision, whereas plenty of animals do. And for spiders, it's good eyesight in their own world. Once again, we forget ourselves when we look at spiders. So in their world, they have eyes. So it ranges from 0 to 8, actually, since some species that live in caves don't have any, they don't need them from an evolutionary standpoint. They lost their vision. They're in the dark, but they often have very long legs with thousands of sensory organs to have all the other senses. Okay. Then there are some tropical families that have 2 eyes or 4, and most spiders have 6 or 8. And these eyes are just fixed lenses that are positioned differently. So when you have, for most spiders, 8 eyes, some are facing forward, others slightly to the side, some more upward, and others toward the back. So with the field of vision of each eye, they can have peripheral vision. And so we have the main eyes, the median frontal eyes, and the secondary eyes. These allow the spider to have a lot of information about its environment. So that's great, but she doesn't see well with those. Yes, it's a fixed vision at a short distance, clear, but that doesn't mean it's bad vision. So since most of them are like that, even for these ones that are a bit bigger, the short vision is clear, so it's at a certain distance, and after that the rest is a bit blurry. But it's still enough for these animals to be able to perceive their environment, to move around, and to sense a number of things. And obviously spiders can't detect us then, because even the biggest one, which isn't even the size of Lucas, even the biggest one that's alive, that live in tropical forests. Often they have a sense of their environment, shapes, lights, and so on. Of course, it's blurry, but we aren't perceived as a predatory human mammal. We're just part of the scenery. That's also, a spider never deliberately attacks a human. It doesn't even know what it is, So we also reconsider our perspective on that.
All right, because among the common misconceptions, there are also others that suggest spiders come at night. Oh, yes.
That's true.
Yeah, that's everywhere on social media, yes. Sometimes people even say that we swallow a certain number of spiders per night, but actually a spider can't know what a human is, so it can't have any strategy related to us.
Absolutely not.
They're 2 completely different worlds?
Completely different. It's true that the number of spiders we supposedly swallow at night depends on the source. It can be a few, or I don't remember, I think I saw 30. Well, that's great, isn't it? No, they don't purposely come into our mouths at night. They have no reason to do that. We usually sleep with our mouths closed, not open. We start to open it when we reach a certain age, but it's humid. It creates vibrations. Actually, when we breathe through our mouth, we do this. But she is absolutely not attracted to this kind of vibrations and these slightly humid environments, etc. Eventually, I put myself in a situation where all of a sudden there's one on the ceiling. then suddenly it lets itself down on its thread and bam, it falls into the open mouth. Why not? Except I've never seen that. I've never really heard of that. Do spiders deliberately crawl on us at night? Generally no, but can they move across the comforter or on us? When it's a wandering spider looking for prey at night or a male looking for a female, I can't rule it out. It's possible. We've already found some next to pillows, etc. Very, very rarely, because they don't stay. These environments aren't places where they'll settle, but they can pass through. So then, where's the problem? Since when we're sleeping well, we let ourselves go. So we also need to learn to let go. We need them, and we don't necessarily feel them. So from time to time, some people have told me, I woke up because I felt little things, so it can tickle. And oh, surprise, there was a spider. It can happen. I never said it couldn't. Well, it's a big surprise, of course, but in those cases, you just have to let it go. It was just a phase. There was nothing else about those animals. And actually, the few cases of bites that I've had, people who moved during the night and put their hand on the spider or even closed their thighs because there was a little tickle, that's all right. It doesn't go any further than that. And spiders really have no reason to stay and attack a human during the night, since they're just moving along a surface where nothing to them, and besides, we probably won't even feel it. What about the mites in our bed at night? When it's warm and they're around us, feeding on the flakes of our skin? We leave them, they're there, it's part of the balance, that too.
Earlier, we talked about the fact that the spider is sensitive, sensory, and I think I heard something about taste. How can we experimentally test the sensitivity of an insect, and how can a spider sense taste?
By testing? Well, at the end of its pedipalps, it has thousands of tiny sensory hairs that allow it to have both taste and touch. These are chemoreceptors that are connected to the nervous system. So she herself can taste the prey. There are some that she might leave behind. Some spiders won't take all the prey, for example, that fall into their web if it's a web-building spider. And when they move around, whether by jumping, wandering, or ambushing, they won't feed on all the insects that, for example, come to a flower to gather nectar. For crab spiders, which wait quietly, they can taste their prey like that. So we can test this by putting a number of different prey in front of the spiders. The prey has to move because you can't give dead prey to a spider. Since it has to sense the vibrations of the prey, and thanks to the vibrations and movements, it can estimate the mass of the prey. So I've already seen, for example, an Epera diademata, the classic garden spiders with beautiful cross-shaped spots, reacting to an insect that had fallen in. First, she pulls a little, she teases the threads a bit when the insect stops moving, and she does this to feel where there is resistance in her web. She rushed over this spider and she checked it out. It was a ladybug that got caught in it, a ladybug that suddenly released a little yellowish substance, very, very discouraging for potential predators. The spider checked it out and cut all the little threads around the ladybug, and she let the ladybug go. So she had definitely tasted the prey and realized that it wasn't edible.
Okay.
So yes, spiders of course are sensitive to that thanks to their sensory hairs, and they have parts around their mouths that also allow them to test things.
All right, regarding the morphology of a spider, how do they manage to mate and reproduce? There are also a lot of misconceptions about that.
Yes, is it true that females systematically eat their males? Yes.
For example,
which is not systematic at all. Also, there are many species where the males are the same size as the females, so in those cases it's not obvious. But it's true that anyway, in their lives, males and females of the same species can meet, knowing that they are solitary. And at some point, one of them becomes prey, so it can be the male feeding on the female or vice versa. Males must be cautious during breeding season, as they can be mistaken for prey. Of course, so there is a whole development of approach techniques by the males to, quote unquote, reduce the female's aggressiveness. So they can offer wrapped prey. They can tug on the thread in a certain way, tap, create vibrations, a bit like music or courtship dances by making big movements with their legs and so on. So there are all sorts of approach techniques. And of course, if the female is ready, they will mate. Afterwards, it's often better for them to leave quickly to escape the voracity of the females, who need extra energy to lay their eggs. Still, whether they are eaten by the females or not, the males die after the mating and reproduction phase. It's the end of their life. It's over for the vast majority of them. So then, how are they going to manage once the mating has happened? There are still sexual organs which will actually allow us to distinguish between males and females. How can we distinguish males and females of the same species? You can tell just by looking. Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Puisque, for example, house spiders are often seen wandering inside homes in the fall. If you look closely, it's often the males that are wandering around. And you can spot them by the small pair of pedipalps at the front, so this little pair of legs that act like jaw legs. They're not walking or locomotor legs for moving around. And so at the end, the small pedipalps in males, as they grow and go through successive molts, when they become adults, we saw as they grew that the tip of the pedipalps started to swell up like a little ball. And at the final adult molt, what we call a copulatory bulb has formed. I often tell kids they're like little boxing gloves. So if you look closely at a spider, if you see swellings or little balls at the end of its pedipalps, it's a male. It's pretty easy to remember. Males have balls and females don't. At the end of the pedipalps, nothing has developed in females, so next time you'll have to look at a house spider in the fall. If there are males that have unfortunately fallen into bathtubs, sinks, it can happen, or shower trays. They just slipped along the wall and can't climb back up. You need to check if they have copulatory bulbs at the end of their pedipalps, on the small ones. When you know what to look for, even out in the field with a good little magnifying glass, you can see if it's male or female. I often wonder when I'm doing demonstrations, so did you see, is it male or female? Now we can distinguish between megalomorphs and non-megalomorphs, as well as males and females.
Okay. And how do spiders manage to find each other during this period? Because we said they don't necessarily have good long-distance vision, and that they often live alone, so that means they still have a long way to go.
Yes, well, sometimes the males don't find females. It can happen, but it's always them who search, and that's how they find their way. So, yes. And we must not forget that at that time. The animals emit pheromones, so thanks to the pheromones released by the females during this breeding period, which are very volatile. Nevertheless, so as a result, you have to manage to catch them at some point, but the females produce them regularly and also along the travel paths. There can also be pheromones left by the females, and they can actually detect the pheromones of the same species. So we shouldn't forget that in the silk on the legs, there are chemoreceptors. So as a result, we're actually talking about recognition, not only visual once they're closer, but before that, it's chemical recognition with pheromones.
So we're talking about the cases of spiders that have a more solitary behavior. We mentioned a small minority of species that live
in society, quote unquote.
So what is it? How are they different, and do they get along?
That's exactly it. It's about individuals tolerating each other. And they can tap each other, feel each other with their legs, with their sensory silk, and there's no aggression from one individual towards another. So we really have a kind of joint construction. Often these are species that make large sheets of silk, which can be quite considerable. These are tropical species. Sometimes on the sides of trails, huge sheets stretching over several meters in length. It created tangles of threads that formed a large tangled web, and on top of it there were dozens and dozens of small individuals. And they were spiders that, when they met each other, would tap each other, and there was a sense of tolerance. So after that, these aren't societies in quotes like ant or termite societies. There's no queen, there's nothing that will decide for the others, so to speak. I'm using terms that might not be exactly right, but there is a tolerance among the individuals toward each other. For people who work on behavior, they sometimes talk about social arenas. I usually prefer to say community arenas. There isn't necessarily a society, strictly speaking. Still, for some species, there is egg laying in a specific place within this large area, with several females watching over these eggs. Let's say it's a kind of nursery. And then they hunt prey together, because if prey falls in there, it can be quite large prey. Even though these are often small spiders, suddenly the movements are sensed by these spiders. It's actually quite spectacular. Some colleagues have even made films about it. And you see all the spiders stop, and then suddenly, if the prey starts to move, they all rush toward the prey at the same time. And each of them will hook in, inject venom to liquefy, and then each one will take a little bit of liquid from the prey.
So
that's it. Those are the so-called social spiders. And there are about 20 species that can be found in America and Africa. Then there are some species that are semi-social. Because they make webs, each one has its own web, but in a small area you can find a lot of webs. There have been frames, webs that can even overlap, but each one has built its own home, its own trap. Are they solitary? But maybe there was a little tolerance when they started building in the same environment, which was a suitable place for them to settle.
all right, but within the frames, well, in the case where the spider lays eggs, the eggs hatch. Because it has already happened to me to see kinds of little cocoons open up with lots of little spiders coming out of them.
Yes, that was the hatching at that moment.
I was in the wrong place, so no.
It was good. Look at this too.
But then all the spiders were going in different directions. How does that work? So at that moment, do they each choose a place?
No, it's kind of random. Sometimes. When we see spiders coming out and it's the dispersal phase, there can still be a little gregarious phase among the spiders. For about a week, they'll tolerate each other and stay together. And they live a bit off their yolk reserves, so they have yolk reserves at first, so they don't need to eat right away, and sometimes even before that. Actually, their dispersal can be caused by the fact that they start to disperse, and as they do, they can start eating each other. But in any case, indeed, at some point it's dispersal, meaning that each one will go look for a place to settle. If it's a web-building spider, it will go look for a small place to build its web. And at that point, there are still many that will disperse through the air. We're talking about ballooning, so for the vast majority of spiders, they disperse through the air when they're young. This is the phenomenon known as gossamer threads or spider rain. And sometimes they cover large areas like over meadows, for example. They all flew away at the same time, letting their threads go. They were hanging on and then they fell back down. Sometimes it's not very, very far. Sometimes they're very, very high up in the sky. There are a lot of losses at that moment. And then when they all fall at the same time, they always have threads behind them, so they move and it covers considerable areas. But it's chance that made them fall in that place, so it can be in the open sea. And in those cases, they die too, so there can be a considerable loss at that moment. And we usually say that out of the number of little ones that will reach adulthood. In the same cocoon, which depending on the species can contain about 10 eggs, up to hundreds and hundreds, only 1% will reach adulthood. So the regulation happens at that moment. During the delicate ballooning period of the virgin, it feels like we're being invaded. These small spiders are spreading out to find a place to settle. And they know very well, after analyzing the environments, once again, they choose a microhabitat so they can settle at that moment.
Do they have survival strategies in winter when the temperature tends to drop? Do they hide in certain places?
Spiders are around year-round. You see fewer of them in winter, indeed, because they tend to eat less. That's because there are fewer insects around. And for many spiders, in any case, are often discreet in their way of life. They aren't always very visible throughout the year, even during other periods. They're not necessarily always easy to spot either. But at that time, we often have either eggs in the vegetation, so they're quietly waiting for spring to come out. So they spend the winter as eggs, or even in the first juvenile stage inside the cocoon, and they wait like others. There was a breeding period in the spring. The eggs and the young came out during the summer phase. They went through 2 or 3 molts, and they will spend the winter in a young stage. But they keep going. They can continue to hunt, but maybe in a slower way, since there are a bit fewer prey. But since they can fast for quite a long time, there's no problem. But we see them less often because they are usually small species, since they are juveniles. But they are definitely present, and there are also species where adults are present in winter. But not all of them are active hunters during the day. Many of them hunt at night and during the night time. For example, we can see them in winter as well. On tree trunks, they come out at night and wait for prey to come to them on the tree trunks. So the image we have of spiders, how they spend the winter, etc., they actually do very well in winter, either as eggs or as first stage young in the cocoons, or as juveniles in the vegetation. And there are also a few that are at the adult stage, with sometimes less activity, of course. So it's not a hibernation. It's not a special hibernation, so they can still slow their development and prey capture since there's less. And we can also have estimates, by the way. That means that some spiders will, when it's really, really hot too, we always talk about the cold, but when it's very hot, it's not good either. It's not very favorable for having a lot of insects either, so there aren't necessarily many prey. And indeed, for example, some mason tarantulas from the south of France dig burrows in the ground when it's really too hot, and their burrow is quite deep. And there's the operculum that you could see at ground level, but they make a double operculum inside and they lock themselves in and they wait. So it's a kind of estivation since they're not very active because it's way too hot.
Okay, does that mean there are borderline areas on Earth where there are no spiders because the climate conditions go beyond a certain point?
There are spiders everywhere, but it depends on the species. Let me remind you that roughly speaking, with our current knowledge, and I think there are still just as many, if not 10 times more, yet to be described, we're at about 54,000 almost so. There are species with different hunting techniques, different ways of reproducing, and different habitats. And so we find spiders even at 6,700 meters altitude in the Himalayas, although there aren't many species there. We're not in diversity hotspots there, but yes, they're everywhere. They're in deserts too, with big temperature differences in the deserts. Very, very hot during the day, and it can be very cold at night too. We always think about our own active period, us being diurnal, but the activities are different. So there are spiders everywhere, and depending on the species, they've adapted genetically. It's defined by different conditions.
Okay, so we've seen lots of different species here, species that can fly, species that dig underground, species that adapt to all kinds of environments. There's one I'm thinking of. In aquatic environments, we talk about water spiders. Are they actually spiders, or is that just a name we use incorrectly?
So there are two things. There is actually a real aquatic spider. It's called the Argyroneta aquatica. Argyroneta aquatica, and it's the only species that has returned to aquatic life. We shouldn't forget that spiders are now land animals, but this one has gone back to living in water. It breathes with lungs like all spiders, and lung breathing is usually for air, but this is a spider that lives in ponds. Often in shallow areas or in places that aren't exactly lakes, but still in environments of fairly good quality, usually. And it makes a sort of bell, an air bubble, like a diver's bell. It captures with the hairs on its body. It has very, very dense hairs, a lot of hairs on its body. It raises its abdomen, it captures the surface of the water, it captures the air, because these are hydrophobic hairs, and so it captures the air with its hairs. It goes down and it creates a bubble around itself. Okay, it goes down. In the aquatic vegetation, it has previously taken care to make a sort of little bell with loosely tangled silk threads, a little bell in the aquatic vegetation. And once it's there, it will rub its hind legs on the air bubble that was covering its body. And the bubble will rise. The bubble always rises, except this bubble is trapped by the little dome of silk. And she will repeat this process several times to create this air bubble. She always actually has air around her no matter what, because she breathes with her lungs with the air bubble, and then she lives inside this air bubble. She will hunt small aquatic insects, little larvae, tiny tadpoles, and so on in the water, which she will eat inside her bell. The males, when they leave their bell, they go looking for the females' bells. They reproduce inside this bell, and she will lay eggs in this bell. So although she's aquatic and does everything in the water, she's always in the air in the end. And then there are some that are semi-aquatic, which will reproduce on land, but can also dive underwater for several minutes, covered with an air bubble to go hunt aquatic insects and small aquatic prey. But the majority of species are considered terrestrial, so it's a species that has returned to aquatic life. And when we sometimes talk about spiders, water on the surface, and we see those little things moving around really fast, those aren't spiders, they're insects. 6 legs, antennae, and they're part of the bug family. We also call them water bugs. If we count the legs, notice antennae, and observe its movement, we can identify it. It's the same with the legs. There are also hydrophobic bristles and so on. They're bugs, hence the confusion. Actually, they're water striders, what we call water striders. We talk about water spiders, we talk about mites. Sometimes we have red spiders, those tiny red mites, we call them red spiders, but they're not spiders either. They're arachnids, but not spiders. So there's still some confusion about that.
For those who would like to go a little further and learn more, are there any books you've written or others that you would already recommend?
Regarding the somewhat negative approach that some people might have? Being a doctor in biology and not a doctor in psychology, but having received phobic patients for about 30 years, I wrote a book with a psychotherapist, Abdelkader Mokaddem, called I'm Not Afraid of Spiders Anymore, which really helps people. We really tried to explain things, so he really took the time to understand what a fear is, what anxiety is, and even what a debilitating phobia is behind all that. I tried, and we mentioned quite a few of them. We dispelled some misconceptions. There's a book called 50 Misconceptions About Spiders, which was published by Koya. And I also wrote a book with a photographer so that we change our perspective through the lens and approach these diverse animals, which is called Fascinating Spiders, with Philippe Blanchot, who was the photographer. Afterwards, there are a number of guides that can also be interesting for those who want to go further. There's Spiders of France and Europe, et d'Europe. Spiders was a book in English, so it was translated. I also have a Swiss colleague who made a small field guide about spiders, whose name is Jim Blandonia, which I also recommend, and otherwise as a field guide. With the one who trained me on spiders quite a few years ago, Alain Canard, there is a small guide called Discovering Spiders and Other Arachnids that's useful in the field. To go and discover information sheets on the majority of the 100 or so spider species that we can encounter around us in mainland France.
So, for example, with this book, I could go into the forest and be able to recognize and identify the different ones.
It's not an identification guide. It's still, okay. D'accord,
Okay.
hein? Donc, c'est to move towards identifying spiders, especially since they are small. There are often samples to be taken with observation, using a good quality binocular magnifier to look at the organs, etc. But it allows you to say, hey, I saw that, there are sheets, there are some features you can go look at, we have silhouettes, we have the shape of the web, which can be very interesting, and it can go as far as the family. And with that, indeed, afterwards, we have sheets that correspond to specific families. So it can guide us, but we're not going to put a name on that species right away. That's it.
Okay, that works. We'll add all the links and description. Thanks again for the conversation. It was a pleasure and very interesting.
Thank you.